I had a lot, but I think that's
Hi, good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. Thanks for being here. We're going to finish the book of Ezra this morning, and I see the excitement in your faces. Right? But then we'll move from there to Nehemiah before we start something new. We're covering this in large chunks, so this morning will be chapters 7 through the end of that book, so 7 through 10. There's kind of where we've been, just kind of walking back through it, is that Judah has been able to come out of Babylon and they're rebuilt the temple. Well, the first part of the book covers that. Those first 6 chapters cover the delay that's caused by the people of the lands, and then the renewed commitment to do this, the orders from the king that had gone back and looked at the decree of Cyrus. The temple is built, Passover has been celebrated, and now we enter into the actual Ezra phase of this. And these are what many believe to be Ezra's memoirs, at least part of this. There's always some confusion about who writes what in the Old Testament especially, because of the way authorship works. But this part we'll hear from Ezra himself. So let's look at chapter 7. We're not going to read nearly all of this as we make our way through. We're going to kind of take sections of it. So let's start. Let's just start by looking at the first few verses of Ezra 7. Now after this, the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Mariot, son of Zeriah, son of Uzai, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. This Ezra went up from Babylon. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Okay. So let's talk about Ezra for a minute and who he is. This long list of names that's given as Ezra's genealogy, we find Aaron. Okay, Aaron, the first high priest of Israel. So Ezra is a descendant. This is going to be important. We've already talked about the whole genealogy thing as the book of Ezra opens and Judah returns. And it's very, very important to them that they find that they know their history, they know their genealogy, that these are actual descendants of Abraham. We've had a run-in already with people who are not, or people who may be partially descended from Abraham. And we believe those to be the Samaritans, where the temple is going to be rebuilt. They offer their help, and these people who return say, no, thank you. Okay? As difficult as that relationship has been, it gets worse there, and it's about to get worse again. Okay? Between the Jews and the Samaritans. But Ezra, it's very, very important that we know that he is a son of Aaron, because he is going to be the one that heads up all of the things that are going to happen in the new temple. He is a scribe. That seems to be his title, and there's a little bit of, not really confusion, but differing opinions on what exactly that means. At the very least, it is that he is very, very well learned in the law of Moses, and that gets repeated several times. It's here in verse 6, again in verse 10, verse 11, verse 12, talks about his knowledge of what it is that God has to say. There is also at least a hint in some places that he works as a royal official, as a scribe under Artaxerxes, which is not outside the realm of possibility when we see what happens here, and he gets sent back. And we're not going to read Artaxerxes' letter. We've read several of those through Ezra. But what we'll notice if we do read that, and when we do read that, is that he has been granted ultimate authority in Jerusalem. He is the one who sets the law. He is also the one who is over what punishment gets handed out. And this has been handed to him by the king of Persia. The king is very, very favorable to this for whatever reason, and it seems maybe the reason we've just read, that the hand of the Lord his God is on him. But he is going to send Ezra back with as many people, as many of the Jewish people that want to go, with supplies and with orders that others are to provide whatever it is that he needs when he gets there. So he's setting in a pretty good spot. All right, so they're going to leave. Let's move on down to verse 7. There went up also to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, some of the people of Israel, some of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants. Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For on the 1st day of the month he began to go up from Babylonia, and on the 1st day of the 5th month he came to Jerusalem, for the good hand of his God was on him. Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. So they leave the first of the year. So this is really following pretty close to around Passover time, but this is when they set to go. They don't leave until the 12th. Find that out a bit later. But they're ready to go on the 1st day of the 1st month. They don't get there until the 1st day of the 5th month, so my math's right, that's about 4 months to get there. Right? It's about a 900-mile journey. To get from Babylon back to Jerusalem, if we were to look at it now, is a pretty straight shot. That's about 500 miles. But they don't go that way because they can't go that way. That's mostly desert, and they'll die. That's why when the invading armies come and they talk about the armies coming from the north, that'd still be Babylon because they come around that desert instead of trying to march through it. Okay, there's about 900 miles, and from whatever from all the folks that I've read, that they travel with this group about 9 miles a day. So it's going to take a little bit to get there. Okay, we have several who go. The order is given that any of the Jewish people who want to go are willing or can. They're going to be released. We also know that some don't go. Some stay. And we know that from looking at the book of Esther, that several of the Jews remain in Persia or in Babylon. Okay? I don't know. I think there's something to the way that this gets presented here, that the author gives it to us. Early in the book, when the Jews begin their return, there's not necessarily a particular order to the way that they go, right, and to the people that go back, but there is here. And I think this has something to say to the people who are going to read this first, okay? And so if we look at it, the priests and Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants. This seems to be the list that he's giving us here. And so what that means to us is very little. Just that these are the people who come back. What this means to the people who read this first is that this calls to mind something else. This calls to mind Israel making their way from Sinai to Canaan, because this is the order in which they go. If you look at the book of Numbers, which is always fascinating at the first because there's a big list of names and guess what? Numbers of the people who go back. But what we find in there is number one, the way that the camp is going to be arranged, which we've talked about before. The tabernacle in the middle, the Levites around it, and then the tribes of Israel around that. Right? God in the middle of all of this. That's where everything faces. When they get ready to leave, that's how they go in a certain order as well. You have, I believe there's 3 of the sons of Aaron, and it's their clans that are responsible for the tabernacle itself. The priests who deal with the holy things, but they don't necessarily carry the holy things. They deal with the holy things, and then they are marched out, and there are some who are in charge of the coverings of the tabernacle, some that are in charge of the framing of the tabernacle, and others that are in charge of the holy things. And this is how they go. God is in the front, right? And so we look here and we hit that same kind of order as those who are coming back again. This is just maybe it's just an affirmation to them that this is God leading us back. This is the order in which he brought us in the first time. This is the order we go back. Okay, that make sense? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, let's go. All right. So we have a pause in chapter 8. There's the genealogy of those who return with Ezra. That's not a huge issue for us. It is for them. But then we have chapter 8, verses 15 through 20, is when they're getting ready to leave, that Ezra notices that he's short some people, short some Levites. These are very important people when it comes to temple worship. And so he sends someone to go gather them. And so that's one of the delays. It says early in chapter 7 that they leave on the first day of the month. They don't actually set out until the 12th day because that's how much time it takes for them to round up the other Levites that need to go with them. Okay? Got it? Here we go. I want us to look really quickly at chapter 8, verse 21. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him a safe journey for ourselves, our children, and all our goods. For I was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy on our way, since we had told the king, the hand of our God is for good on all who seek him, and the power of his wrath is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and implored our God for this, and he listened to our entreaty. I think this is a good thing for us to kind of stop and look at for just a second. Ezra has said, we're going to be fine. And this is what he's told the king in so many words. We're going to be fine because God is with us. God has been God who stirred Cyrus to send us back. It's going to be God that's with us on the way back. And then we get to Ahava, and Ahava is a canal. Nobody knows exactly where this is, but it's still in Babylon or Persia, and they're getting ready to leave. And then they look out and they do the math, okay? 900 miles, 9 miles a day, large group of people, not just that, but the value of all of the things that we are taking with us. And they go, whew, that's a long way. There's a lot between here and there. But Ezra will not go and ask the king for help. He said, we proclaimed a fast because I was ashamed to ask the king for help because I'd already told him that God would take care of us. It's one of those spots where kind of where the rubber meets the road kind of thing. It's all good and fine. It's all good and fine for us to sit here and talk about how great God is and how much God cares for us and what all God will do for us. And when we're sitting here on Sunday morning, we're going, you bet. And then we leave. And then we go, do I believe that or do I not? Right? And sometimes it's harder to believe than it is at others. We go, do I really believe this or do I not? And we are sometimes tempted to run to something else to take care of us. One of the things that when that happens, I hope that we do is that we remember Ezra. We'll remember Ezra for other things, but this is a good one. I was ashamed to ask anybody else. because I've already confessed that God can do this. I was afraid to go look for protection somewhere else because I'd said that God would do this. Now I'm going to live it out. Okay? And that's what they do. This is a very, very short, the author here covers this trip in a very short amount of time. But this is an incredible journey. Right? 100 days. Right? At least that's what we're thinking. Or no, not quite that. Yeah. So we're a long ways. And every day, knowing what it is that they carry, the value of it and where they are and what they have, this is nerve-wracking. But they live it out, and they do this every day. 9 miles a day with all of these people, and they make it. All right? And it's no wonder that he will say that the good hand of the Lord was on him. And often that's what it takes. Sometimes we go through those spots where we've done that, right? We've said, okay, I'm just gonna follow along, and it was rough. And it's at the end of that we can look back and go, and the good hand of the Lord our God was on us. Okay? Doesn't always seem that way at the time, but we'll often see it when we look back. Okay, chapter 9. Chapter 9, we have a problem, and it's a big one. Okay? They've made it back to Jerusalem. They give the treasure to those who need it or who are in charge of it. They get everything put away. They get all that stuff done. All the unpacking's done. We're getting settled, right? And here comes somebody to Ezra. After these things had been done, the officials approached me and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands with their abominations, from the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with the peoples of the lands. And in this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and the chief men have been foremost. All right, what's the big deal? Okay, can we just say it out loud? What's the big deal? It's been years, okay? It's been decades since Judah has come back from Babylon before Ezra gets there. Some I've read as many as 80 years between the time that they leave the first time to come back to Judah till Ezra shows up. So it's been a while. And so in that time, they have built the temple, just like they're supposed to, and they've also settled. They've settled in the land, and now we have this problem of marriage between the Jews and the peoples of the land. Now, the peoples of the land, some of that's Samaritans, some of it's not. Okay, as it's been resettled in Judah's absence. But what's the big deal? This is where this is probably, as in part of their memory, is this is where everything started to go bad. Not with Ezra, but with Israel way, way back. We have David the king. This is the kind of he is the king, the exemplar king. And following him is Solomon, and it's during Solomon's reign that the kingdom expands as big as it had been. Solomon's wealth, Solomon's we've read all about that, and Solomon's wisdom, but Solomon's problem, and Solomon's problem is the multiple wives from various nations that draw his heart away from the God of Israel. And following Solomon, we have a divided kingdom. And the kings of the north, that none of them followed the covenant of God, that gets shipped out in 722 and the kings of the south, which eventually do the same thing because they look just like the people around them and the people who were there before. That was the promise. That was the promise that God made when he brought them to Canaan. Right? You are going to be a holy people. You're going to be my people. And if you want to be the people and act like the people who are there right now, I'm going to treat you just like the people that are there right now, and I will vomit you out of the land, is what he says. I will kick you out of here. And he does. And for 70 years, they're in Babylon, and now they've come home, and they've started the whole process again. Or so it appears to Ezra. That is like, have you not learned anything, right? Is that you can't learn or that you won't learn, right? What's the deal here? So Ezra is incredibly upset. Now, it's one thing. It seems to be one thing to our author that this occurs among the rank and file of the Jews who come back. But what's really got him is that the officials and the priests are right in the middle of this, and they're leading the way. There's a lot of things covered about marriage outside of Israel in the law. There is. There are those for whom wives will be attained by taking of slaves of the nations that they conquer. I mean, that's there. But one thing that is there is that the Levites and the priests are not to do this ever. Okay? And it looks like we've kind of let this go. All right. So I want to get to Ezra's response and Ezra's prayer. We are going to read that. So let's look at chapter 9. Let's start in verse 3. As soon as I heard this, I tore my garment and my cloak and pulled hair from my head and beard and sat appalled. Then all who trembled at the words of the God of Israel, because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles, gathered around me, while I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. The evening sacrifice I rose from my fasting with my garment and my cloak torn, and fell upon my knees, and spread out my hands to the Lord my God, saying, O my God, I am ashamed, and I blush to lift my face to you. For our impurities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has mounted up to the heavens. From the days of our fathers to this day, we have been in great guilt. And for our iniquities, we, our kings, and our priests have been given into the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, to plundering, to utter shame, as it is today. But now for a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God, to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within his holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery. For we are slaves. Yet our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended to us his steadfast love before the kings of Persia, to grant us some reviving, to set up the house of our God, to repair its ruins, and to give us protection in Judea and in Jerusalem. And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you commanded by your servants, the prophets, saying, the land that you are entering to take possession of it is a land impure with the impurities of the peoples of the land and with their abominations that have filled it from the end to end with their uncleanness. Therefore do not give your daughters to their sons, neither take their daughters for your sons, and never seek their peace or prosperity, that you may be strong and eat the good of the land and leave it for an inheritance to your children forever. And after all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and for our great guilt, seeing that you, our God, have punished us less than our iniquities deserved, and have given us such a remnant as this, shall we break your commandments again and intermarry with the peoples who practice these abominations? would you not be angry with us until you consumed us, so that there should be no remnant, nor any to escape? O Lord, the God of Israel, you are just. For we are left a remnant that has escaped. For we are left a remnant that has escaped. As it is today, behold, we are before you in our guilt, and none can stand before you because of this. Man, there's a lot. There's a lot here. Ezra is the descendant of Aaron, the first high priest, and he carries out one of the duties of the priest here in very, very bold, or very, very stark fashion. It is the priest, and particularly on that one day a year, that Day of Atonement, where the priest offers the sacrifice on behalf of himself and for the sins of all of Israel. And he identifies with Israel as he goes into that holy place. On the breastplate and on the ephod are the stones that bear the names of the tribes of Israel. And as Aaron goes in before the Ark of the Covenant, he carries with him the guilt of all of Israel. And Ezra does it right here in this prayer. There's no indication anywhere that Ezra is guilty of intermarrying with anyone. But listen to what he says. This is what we have done. We're in this together, is what he says. And we all stand before you guilty. And just what we mentioned this just a few minutes ago. Ezra seems to get it. This is what caused the problem in the first place. And you kicked us out of here. And there's that section where he says, we deserved more. You didn't punish us as much as we deserved. And he is absolutely right. Because what the covenant that God made with Israel was that if you do this, you will be completely removed from the land and be out. And they were removed, but God saved a remnant and brought them back. He's under no obligation to do that whatsoever. He said, just for a brief moment, right, just for a little bit, you gave us some relief in letting this group come back and to rebuild the temple and to do the things and to be the people we were supposed to be. Just for a little bit. You let us do that, and we've decided we didn't want it. And now what do we do? The remedy to this is not going to be pretty. Okay? It's not. But it appears that Ezra's sermon prayer, which seems to be what this is. I believe it to be a prayer and a genuine, but this is not Ezra going in somewhere and praying this to God by himself. He is before all of those who tremble at the words of God, all of those who are serious about, what have we done here? And he throws himself in front of them face down, and these are the words that he speaks, and they all hear him. And so what's the answer? The answer is that they send away the foreign wives and children. That's tough. They go through and they gather those who have done this. They name them. And there's a list of people who are guilty of intermarriage. Many. Scholars that you read on this will say this is not the complete list. And the reason that they say this is because of the thousands of people, right? We're talking of thousands of people who have come back to Judah. There's only one of them, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, one of them said there's about 110 names mentioned here. So that seems incredibly small right? Doesn't it? And it seems incredibly small to warrant this kind of move, right? So they believe that it was probably far more widespread than that. That's certainly the report we get the first part of chapter 9. But the answer is to send them away. I don't know what to do with that, okay? I don't. We look at this passage, right? I think about this passage in context of other things. What it is that God talks about in terms of divorce, Old Testament wise, okay? Because that's where we are. There's provision made for it, but it's not something that he's after. We know that's not something that he's after, because if we can skip ahead a little bit to when that question gets asked of Jesus about divorce, that Jesus says, that's not the design. So how is this an answer? And I wrestle with it, okay? I do. I'm not, well, there's so many things I don't know, it's not funny. But that aside for just a second, there is something that I want us to see, and a couple of things that I want us to see that play out down the road a little ways. The first one is that I hope that we always remember this. That there is sin is never without cost. How about that? Never. And it's incredibly rare, as a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say never, is it that our sins don't have an effect on someone else. It's not never just about us. And the consequences of those are often painful. And they're often painful not just to us, but to others around us. But the second one is that this is what repentance looks like. And it's not pretty often. They give great attention to this. And they do because it's a big deal. There are places in the law, as you look particularly through Deuteronomy, and some in Leviticus as well, where it's talked about sacrifices offered because of people sin unintentionally. You'll read that a lot. But then there's the penalty for those that, what God would call those who sin with a high hand, is what he says. It's almost like they look at it and go, I'm doing it anyway. Right? That's a scary place. The reason that's a scary place is because, if I'm remembering right, that person will be cut off from his people. Now, there's a lot of debate about what exactly that means, but one of the things that it means at the very least is no longer a part of the people of God. I think they see the seriousness when Ezra brings it out. For quite a while now, and we don't know a lot about what goes on in Babylon, how it is that they maintain who they are while they're there. God has told them through Jeremiah, seek the good of the city, right? Put down roots. You're going to be there a while. But how they maintain their identity as the people of God while they're there, I don't really know for sure. So part of that's the beginning of synagogue worship. Those kinds of things happen in Babylon because they're away from the temple. There is no temple. But now they're back, and maybe it's just that this is the way that it's been, and we've been okay with it. And God seems to be okay with it. But it's now called to their attention, and something has to be done. And so this is what's done. And again, it's not pretty. We might write this differently if we were doing it. You think? Or is it just me? We might try to make this a different ending, but we don't. This is how the book of Ezra ends. Now, one of the things that we need to notice, is the impact that Ezra has on Judaism moving forward. Okay? We've talked about this some. This would be the early stages of what is called Second Temple Judaism. And it's Second Temple Judaism is the world in which Jesus lives. Okay? Ezra. So his qualifications we talked about early, his lineage we talked about as the direct descendant of Aaron. He is well versed in the law. When we talk about the way that he's viewed by the rabbis, that if the law had not come through Moses, it could have easily come through Ezra. That's how he's revered. And he is right up there. Okay? Now, I wonder how this plays out moving forward. We said that the problem between Jews and Samaritans doesn't improve when the Jews come back and the Samaritans, we believe the peoples of the land, that's who we believe them to be, say, we want to help you rebuild the temple, and they say, no thanks, we don't want your help. The Samaritans, or at least that group at that time that I believe will eventually become the Samaritans, are worshiping the God of Israel, but along with other gods. And so the Jews go, no, we don't want your help. And so they take active steps to stop the construction. What happens to the wives and children here? Nothing really said, but one of the things, and a very likely thing that happens, is that they are sent back to their families, of the peoples of the land. Probably not a real boost for the relationship between Jews and Samaritans, if that's the case as well. And so we see that tension play out in the New Testament. As Jesus tells one of the most outlandish parables that we could think of, and we don't think of it that way, but they sure did, that there could be such a thing as a good Samaritan. Right? But maybe even more than that. One of the problems that keeps cropping up in the teaching of Jesus and in the early church is, are we really going to be involved with Gentiles? We are God's people. We have nothing to do with them. And if you don't believe me, go and read Ezra. This is how much we have nothing to do with them. They're the cause. They may be looked at as the cause that we lost the promised land. Because it doesn't say that out loud, but we just kind of use our imagination for a second, if you'll let me. The way we remember things and the way we tell the stories. After a little while of telling the stories about our own lives, it no longer becomes my fault. There's always somebody else that had some sort of influence in that, right? Okay, it's just me. You got me, all right? But now what we do, Ezra seems to go, we own it. But I just wonder if after the generations and generations of going, you see, it's those people. If they hadn't been as close to us as they were, then we wouldn't have done this, right? I have that trouble all the time. If people would just act like they ought to, right, then I wouldn't have so much trouble, huh? People just drive the way I thought they ought to, I wouldn't have to yell at them, right? And I wonder if they begin to see things in those terms. It's little places that we'll find throughout the teachings of Jesus. And John 10, I'm the good shepherd. There are other sheep that are not of this sheepfold, and I must seek them as well, and there'll be one flock and one shepherd. I wonder how they heard that. I don't have to wonder too much. Because if we fast forward just a little while, we find Paul. And Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, and we see the trouble that all of this is causing. As there's a giant council held in Jerusalem about what are we going to do with these Gentile people, because they're not really us. And they need to be us. They need to be Jewish before they can be Christian. That's kind of the idea. They really need to be us in order to really be us. And the council says no. The letters that Paul writes, there's Jew-Gentile tension in many of these churches. But one of the places where I think of it that really shows up incredibly obvious is when Paul is arrested. Okay, if you go to the book of Acts, and I think it's in 22, Paul's arrested. And he's about to be beat to death, okay? And the Roman soldiers save him. They come and get him, and they start to take him into the barracks, and Paul says, let me talk to him. All right? Not always a good idea, but they did. And that's how it sounded to start with. Ta-da! No, just playing. And so Paul begins by addressing them as brothers, speaks to them in their own dialect, right? And he has their attention. I mean, that quick. And it goes along with Paul making a defense of what it is that he's doing. And everything seems to be fine until he says that God has sent me to the Gentiles. And that's when it blows up. I think that's one of the ways we see this particular thing play out as it moves on in through the lives of the Jewish people into the time of Jesus, and it bleeds its way all the way today if we're not careful. And it becomes us against those people, whoever those people may be. All right, we're going to wrap up with this. I do want to just reiterate a couple things. One is the enormous cost and damage that can be done by sin. We know it. We've heard it. And yet it's sometimes so easy to forget that the decisions that we make and the effect that they have on the people around us, okay, that sin always has consequences, and they are rarely just ours. It has an impact on those around us. The importance of, and the difficulty sometimes of repentance. but it's a necessity. And understanding that we are where we are as the people of God, not because we're special, but because he is. That's what he said, what Ezra says. Is of going, you have not punished us for nearly for what we deserve. That's God's grace. All right? Let's close with a prayer. Father, we love you so much. And we know as we sit and we think about it and as we stand before you, we've all done it. We've all transgressed what it is you want. And we're so thankful that you haven't punished us as we've deserved. But instead, you've extended grace and mercy. Our prayer, Father, is that we don't presume on that we understand what's been given, and we allow that to move us to be obedient people. Help us to understand that the commands that you give us, the direction that you want us to go, is for our good. It's for your glory. And help us to trust you enough to do it well. We're thankful, Father, for our time together this morning. We're thankful for these words that have been preserved for us. And we love you so much. What we want, Father, is to be your people. Help us to do that and to do it well, and to represent you well, and to love you the way that you've loved us. We ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.